The manifest listed a single passenger, Serafina Monroe, a name that conjured images of silk scarves and old money. So when a woman in plain black sweats and a nondescript hoodie walked up the air stairs, Chloe's first thought was that there had been a terrible mistake. This woman didn't look like she belonged in the stratosphere. She looked like she'd won the flight in a radio contest. Chloe plastered on her professional smile, but inside her contempt was already taking flight. It was her job to maintain the ambiance of luxury, and this passenger was a glaring stain on the pristine cabin. The engines of the Gulfstream G700 spooled up with a low, predatory whine, a sound that usually filled Chloe with a sense of borrowed power. For the duration of the flight, this was her domain. She was the gatekeeper of luxury, the curator of an experience reserved for the 0.1%. She smoothed the front of her tailored uniform, the Aerolux Elite logo stitched in silver thread over her heart. The company motto was perfection at any altitude. Chloe's personal motto was a bit more pragmatic. The richer they are, the more they demand. The poorer they look, the more they pretend. This passenger, a Ms. Serafina Monroe according to the manifest, fell into a confusing category. The flight had been booked for a single passenger, chartered from New York to a private airstrip near Jackson, Wyoming. A flight like that cost a fortune, easily a six-figure sum. Yet the woman looked like she'd just rolled out of bed to catch a commercial red-eye. No Louis Vuitton luggage, no diamond watch, not even the telltale sheen of a $500 facial. Just a simple leather backpack she'd placed carefully by her feet. Chloe began the pre-flight service with her practiced, gleaming smile. "Ma'am, can I get you a pre-departure beverage? We have Armand de Brignac champagne, or perhaps some fresh squeezed orange juice." Serafina Monroe looked up from the tablet she'd been studying, her eyes dark and analytical. There was a stillness about her that was unsettling. "Just some water, please. Room temperature." "Of course," Chloe chirped, though her smile tightened. Room temperature water. How pedestrian. She retrieved a bottle of Fiji from the cooler, deliberately letting the condensation chill her fingers before pouring it into a crystal glass. She placed it on the polished burl wood table with a little too much force, causing the water to slosh near the rim. "Will there be anything else before takeoff?" "No, thank you. I'll be working for the first hour, so I'd appreciate it if I'm not disturbed unless it's necessary." The request was polite, but the tone was firm, dismissive. It was the tone of someone used to being obeyed, and it rubbed Chloe the wrong way. Who was this woman to tell her how to do her job? As the jet climbed, hitting its cruising altitude of 45,000 feet, Chloe retreated to the galley. It was a marvel of compact engineering, with a convection oven, a refrigerator, and an espresso machine all seamlessly integrated. She pulled out her phone and texted her boyfriend Rick, a short-haul pilot for a regional airline. "Chloe, you will not believe the passenger on this flight, single charter on a G700, and she looks like she manages a laundromat. Asked for tap water. She'd exaggerated slightly. It was Fiji, but tap water had a better ring to it. Rick, LOL. Probably some new money lottery winner. Thinks a private jet is just a quiet bus. Make sure you get a good tip." Chloe, "Tip? Please. I'll be lucky if she doesn't try to pay with a coupon. I hate these pretenders." The truth was, Chloe needed a good tip. She and Rick were drowning in debt. They'd bought a condo they couldn't afford, financed with a high-interest loan. Rick's salary was stagnant, and Chloe's depended heavily on the generosity of passengers. The real billionaires, the old money types, they were often the most generous. They appreciated flawless service. It was the pretenders, the ones who acted like they belonged, but clearly didn't, who were the worst. They were demanding, entitled, and worst of all, cheap. An hour passed. Chloe prepared the meal service she had planned, a pan-seared branzino with a saffron risotto. The aroma filled the small cabin. It was a dish designed to impress. She plated it beautifully, a sprig of parsley placed just so, and carried it out to the main cabin. Serafina was still engrossed in her tablet, her brow furrowed in concentration. She didn't look up as Chloe approached. "Ma'am, your lunch is ready," Chloe announced, her voice a little louder than necessary. Serafina held up a single finger, not taking her eyes off the screen. "One moment, please." Chloe stood there, holding the heavy plate, her arms starting to ache. The nerve. She was being treated like a servant. Well, she was a servant, but not one to be ignored. After a full 30 seconds that felt like an eternity, she cleared her throat. "Ma'am, the dish is best served hot." Serafina finally looked up, her focus shifting from the tablet to Chloe's face. The intensity in her gaze was startling. "I apologize," she said, her voice even. "I'm in the middle of a delicate negotiation. I'm afraid I've lost my appetite. Perhaps you could wrap it up for me to have later?" Lost her appetite? Chloe stared at the perfectly cooked fish, the creamy risotto. This was an insult to her effort, to her craft. "Wrap it up." "Ma'am, this is not a takeout restaurant. The integrity of the dish will be compromised." "I understand that," Serafina said calmly, "but my request stands. Please store it for later." A wave of hot fury washed over Chloe. It was the dismissal, the utter lack of appreciation. This woman, with her cheap clothes and her room temperature water, was treating this multi-thousand-dollar catering experience like an afterthought. "As you wish," Chloe said, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. She took the plate back to the galley, her hands trembling with rage. Instead of carefully storing it, she scraped the entire meal into the trash with a series of violent, satisfying thuds. Let her eat a bag of complimentary pretzels later. She spent the next hour stewing in the galley, her resentment building like pressure in a faulty engine. She scrolled through Instagram, looking at photos of influencers and heiresses on private jets, their lives a galaxy away from her own. They were the ones who deserved this, not Ms. Monroe. Later, the cabin call light chimed. Chloe took a deep, steadying breath and walked back out. "Yes, ma'am?" "I seem to have misplaced my charging cable," Serafina said, looking around her seat. "Do you happen to have a spare USB-C on board?" Chloe forced another smile. "Let me check for you." She knew for a fact there were several spare cables in a drawer in the galley. They were provided for this exact purpose. She went back, opened the drawer, looked right at the tangle of white cords and closed it. Returning to the cabin, she put on her most apologetic face. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. It appears the last passenger must have taken our spare. We don't have one." It was a petty lie, a small assertion of control, but it felt good. Serafina just nodded slowly, her eyes unreadable. "I see. Thank you for checking." She didn't argue. She didn't complain. She just returned to her work, a quiet, unnerving stillness settling over her once more. This lack of reaction was more infuriating to Chloe than an argument would have been. It was as if Chloe herself was completely insignificant, her actions too minor to warrant a response. The flight continued, the silence in the cabin a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside the flight attendant. The descent toward Jackson Hole began, the snow-capped peaks of the Grand Tetons rising like jagged teeth from the earth. The view was breathtaking, a panorama of wild, untamed beauty. It was a sight that usually calmed Chloe, reminding her of the majesty of her job. But today the beauty was lost on her. All she could feel was a sour, curdling anger. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Rick. "Rick, how's it going with the Queen of Sheba?" Chloe, "Worse." She dismissed the lunch I made, then had the nerve to ask for a phone charger. I told her we didn't have one. Rick, "Good. Don't let her walk all over you. Some people need to be reminded who's in charge." Rick's words were the validation she craved. He understood. It wasn't about being a servant, it was about respect. This woman, Serafina Monroe, had shown her none. As the plane banked, there was a sudden violent jolt of turbulence. It was common in the mountains, but this was a particularly nasty shear. In the galley, an unsecured coffee pot slid off the counter and crashed to the floor, splashing dark liquid across the pristine white cabinetry. "Damn it," Chloe hissed, grabbing for paper towels. Another problem, another mess to clean up because of this disastrous flight. Just then, the call button chimed again. Its cheerful electronic sound felt like a drill boring into her skull. She stormed out of the galley, a roll of paper towels still in her hand, her face a mask of fury. Serafina was looking toward the cockpit. "That was quite a jolt. Is everything all right with the aircraft?" Her voice was calm, but there was a new edge to it, a professional curiosity. "The pilots are professionals, ma'am," Chloe snapped, her patience completely gone. "They know how to handle a little bit of weather. It's not something you need to concern yourself with. Serafina turned her gaze from the window to Chloe. For the first time, her expression was not neutral. It was sharp, analytical, and cold. I wasn't questioning their professionalism. I was asking about the aircraft's status. That felt like more than standard mountain turbulence. And I'm telling you it's fine, Chloe retorted, her voice rising. We are trained to handle these situations. Perhaps if you weren't so accustomed to riding the bus, you'd understand that. The moment the words left her mouth, she knew she'd crossed a line. The air in the cabin became thick and heavy. The low hum of the engines seemed to fade into nothingness. Serafina Monroe slowly, deliberately, placed her tablet on the seat beside her. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. She wasn't tall, but she had a presence that seemed to fill the entire cabin. She moved with a liquid grace that was both intimidating and mesmerizing. "What did you just say to me?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Chloe, high on adrenaline and indignation, refused to back down. "I said you should stick to things you understand. This world, this level of travel, it's clearly new to you. You should show a little more gratitude and a lot less attitude." "Gratitude?" Serafina repeated the word as if it were a foreign object in her mouth. "Gratitude for what exactly? For being served room temperature water when I know for a fact you stock chilled? For having my lunch request dismissed and the food thrown in the trash? For being lied to about a simple charging cable? Or for being insulted based on my appearance? Tell me, which of these services requires my gratitude?" Chloe was stunned into silence. She knew. How could she know all that? The water, the lunch, the charger. It was impossible, unless she had seen it. "You've been unprofessional, disrespectful, and insubordinate," Serafina continued, her voice never rising above a measured, lethal calm. "But more than that, you've made assumptions. You looked at me, and you decided who and what I was. And you were wrong." Chloe's fear was quickly being replaced by a desperate, cornered defiance. "I don't know who you think you are." "That," Serafina said, taking another step closer, "is the entire problem. You don't know. You didn't think to ask. You didn't care to know. You just saw a black woman in a tracksuit, and your tiny, prejudiced mind filled in the blanks with a narrative that made you feel superior." "How dare you!" Chloe shrieked, her composure shattering completely. "You come onto this plane, acting all high and mighty." "This plane?" Serafina let out a short, humorless laugh. "Let's be very clear about something." She was now standing directly in front of Chloe, close enough that Chloe could see the flecks of gold in her dark, furious eyes. "I am not on this plane," Serafina stated, her voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than any shout. "I own this plane. I own the engines currently keeping us in the air. I own the leather on these seats. I own the crystal glass you slop my water into. Aerolux Elite, the company whose uniform you are disgracing, doesn't own a single aircraft. They manage my fleet. You are not a flight attendant on a charter jet, Chloe. You are a guest in my property, and you are most certainly not in charge." The world tilted on its axis. Chloe's mind went blank. It was like trying to process a mathematical equation for which she had no numbers. Owns the plane? Manages her fleet? It couldn't be true. It was a bluff, a lie designed to intimidate her. But the look in Serafina Monroe's eyes held no deception. It held only the cold, hard truth. Chloe felt a primal scream of panic rising in her throat. Her career, her condo, her entire fragile life built on this job. She could see it all crumbling to dust. It was this woman's fault. This quiet, unassuming woman who had tricked her. In that moment of pure, unadulterated panic, all of Chloe's training, her professionalism, her humanity vanished. There was only a wild, desperate need to lash out, to make this woman feel as small and as hurt as she did. Her hand moved before she even thought about it. It was a reflex born of pure rage and terror. The sound of the slap was shockingly loud in the confined space of the cabin. It echoed, sharp and ugly. A crack of thunder in the pressurized silence. Serafina Monroe's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow. A vivid red mark began to bloom on her dark cheek. Chloe's hand tingled, the shock of the impact traveling up her arm. She stared, horrified at what she had just done. Time stopped. The hum of the engines returned, a deafening roar. Serafina slowly turned her head back to face Chloe. There was no anger in her eyes now. There was no emotion at all. It was a terrifying void, an absolute bottomless emptiness that was colder than the air outside the cockpit window. She raised a hand not to her cheek, but to a small intercom on the wall. She pressed the button. "Captain Davies," she said, her voice perfectly level, without a single tremor. "This is Serafina Monroe. Please have law enforcement meet the aircraft upon landing. Your flight attendant has just assaulted me." Captain Robert Davies was a man who lived by checklists. Pre-flight checklists, takeoff checklists, landing checklists. They were the scripture of aviation, the sacred text that separated order from chaos at 40,000 feet. He had just confirmed the final approach vectors with the Jackson Hole Tower when the cabin intercom crackled to life. "Captain Davies, this is Serafina Monroe. Please have law enforcement meet the aircraft upon landing. Your flight attendant has just assaulted me." The voice was unnaturally calm. It was the calmness that sent a spike of ice through Robert's veins. In his 25 years of flying, he'd dealt with medical emergencies, engine warnings, and severe weather. He had never received a call like this, and never from a passenger who knew his name. Passengers knew him as the captain. Serafina Monroe had used his name. Copy that, Ms. Monroe," he stammered, his co-pilot, a young man named Peterson, looking over with wide eyes. "Can you confirm the situation in the cabin?" "The situation is under control," the voice replied with chilling finality. "Just have them on the tarmac. Discreetly, if possible. We land in 15 minutes. Davies out." The line went dead. Robert stared at the instrument panel, the glowing green numbers suddenly seeming alien and meaningless. Assault? Chloe. She could be difficult, he knew that. A perfectionist with a short fuse. But physical assault? "What do we do?" Peterson whispered, his face pale. Robert's training kicked in. "We do exactly what the passenger requested." He keyed the radio. "Jackson Tower, this is Gulfstream November 770 Sierra Mike. We need to declare an in-flight incident. We require law enforcement presence on the tarmac upon arrival. A non-emergent security situation on board." The tower's response was immediate and professional, but Robert could hear the underlying surprise. A security situation on a private Gulfstream was virtually unheard of. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was thick enough to suffocate. Chloe stood frozen, her hands still tingling, the sound of the slap replaying in her mind on an endless, horrifying loop. She saw the red mark on Serafina's cheek, a brand she had placed there. Serafina Monroe had walked back to her seat without another word. She sat down, buckled her seatbelt, and picked up her phone. Not her tablet, her phone. She made a single call. Her side of the conversation was brief, her voice a low murmur that Chloe couldn't quite decipher, but she caught snippets. "Ben, yes, right now. Protocol Obsidian, Aerolux Elite, full asset review. The employee's name is Chloe. The manifest has the full details. Yes, full spectrum, legal, financial, and personal, and contact Harrison directly. Tell him to be in his office in 1 hour. I will call him then." She disconnected the call and stared out the window as if Chloe had ceased to exist. Protocol Obsidian. It sounded like something from a spy movie. Full asset review. Harrison, Mr. Harrison was the CEO of Aerolux Elite. Why would this woman be calling him directly and with such authority? The truth began to dawn on Chloe, not like a sunrise, but like the slow, terrifying creep of water into the hull of a sinking ship. The confidence, the specific knowledge, the ownership of the plane. It wasn't a bluff. It was all real. She had just slapped a billionaire. Not just any billionaire, but the billionaire who owned the very ground beneath her feet. The woman who was, for all intents and purposes, the sole reason for her employer's existence. Her legs gave way and she sank into the small jump seat in the galley, her head in her hands. Panic was a living thing inside her, clawing at her lungs. She thought about Rick. He would know what to do. She fumbled for her phone. "Chloe, emergency. Call me the second I land. I am in so much trouble." "Chloe, I think I just assaulted the woman who owns the plane. Chloe. Rick, please, I'm serious. She's calling the police. The delivered receipt sat under her messages, but no reply came. The final 15 minutes of the flight were the longest of Chloe's life. She could feel the gentle bumps as the landing gear lowered, the subtle shift in engine pitch. Each mechanical sound was a tick of the clock, counting down to her doom. When the wheels touched down on the runway, the bump was gentle, a testament to Captain Davies' skill. But for Chloe, it felt like a guillotine dropping. The jet taxied smoothly toward a private hangar, away from the main terminal. As they came to a stop, Chloe could see them through the small galley window. Two sheriff's department vehicles, parked discreetly by the hangar door, their lights off. The engines began their spool-down sequence. Serafina remained seated, perfectly still, until the engines were completely silent. Only then did she stand up, gathering her backpack and phone. She didn't look at Chloe. She walked to the main cabin door, where Captain Davies was already standing, his face grim. "Miss Monroe," he said, his voice strained. "The authorities are outside." "Thank you, Captain," she said. "I'd like a word with you and your co-pilot in the hangar after they have spoken with your flight attendant." "Of course, Miss Monroe," he said, avoiding her eyes. The jet door opened, flooding the cabin with the crisp, cold Wyoming air. Two uniformed officers stood at the bottom of the stairs. They were calm, professional, but their presence was an iron wall between Chloe and the rest of the world. Serafina Monroe walked down the stairs, her posture erect, her head held high. She spoke briefly with one of the officers, who nodded and then looked up toward the open door of the plane, his gaze finding Chloe. Chloe's entire body went cold. This was it. This was the end of the line. She watched as Serafina was escorted not to a waiting limousine, but to a black Cadillac Escalade that had pulled silently into the hangar. Before getting in, Serafina paused and looked back, her eyes meeting Chloe's for one final, fleeting moment. There was no hatred in her gaze. There was no anger. There was nothing. It was the detached, impersonal look of a scientist observing a failed experiment. Then she was gone. One of the officers boarded the plane. "Ma'am," he said, his voice polite but firm, "I'm Deputy Miller. We need you to come with us. There's been a complaint of an assault." In a sleek, minimalist office overlooking the night-shrouded skyline of Chicago, Ben Carter moved with the swift, silent efficiency of a predator. While Chloe was being escorted to a sterile interview room at the Teton County Sheriff's Office, Ben was orchestrating a corporate demolition. Ben was more than Serafina Monroe's executive assistant. He was her fixer, her chief of staff, her loyal sentinel. Protocol Obsidian was a designation they had developed for catastrophic breaches of trust or contract. It was a scorched earth response, designed to cauterize a wound and excise any threat to Monroe Dynamics, Serafina's multi-billion-dollar empire in logistics and sustainable technology. His first call had been to the General Counsel of Monroe Dynamics. His second was to the head of their Internal Security and Investigations Unit, a team comprised of former federal agents and forensic accountants. "Full spectrum on Aerolux Elite," Ben had commanded, his voice calm over the encrypted line. "I want to know their current financial health, their other contracts, their debt load, their leadership's personal assets. I want to know what their CEO had for breakfast. The works." Simultaneously, he ran a background check on Chloe Novak, her full name pulled from the flight manifest. The results painted a grim, pathetic picture. He saw the high-interest mortgage on the condo, the maxed-out credit cards, the recent car loan with a predatory interest rate. He saw a digital trail of social media posts filled with envy and resentment, complaints about her job interspersed with photos of a lifestyle she was clearly faking. He even pulled up her boyfriend, Rick Spencer, a pilot whose own personnel file with a regional carrier showed 2 minor infractions for tardiness and a reprimand for unprofessional conduct with cabin crew. Within 30 minutes, the preliminary financial report on Aerolux Elite landed in his inbox. It was worse than he expected. The company was leveraged to the hilt. They had lost 2 major clients in the last quarter and were operating on a razor-thin margin. The Monroe Dynamics account, which included the management of Serafina's personal G700 and 4 other corporate jets, wasn't just their biggest contract. It accounted for nearly 60% of their annual revenue. They were, in essence, a subsidiary of Monroe Dynamics without the official paperwork, and their CEO, a man named George Harrison, had clearly been hiding the company's precarious position during their recent contract negotiations. Ben smiled thinly. This was no longer just about an assault. This was about gross negligence and potential fraud. He dialed George Harrison's direct line. In his plush office in New York, George Harrison was just about to leave for the day when his private line, the one that bypassed his secretary, rang. He saw the block number and his stomach tightened. It was usually his banker or a board member with bad news. "This is Harrison." "Mr. Harrison," Ben's voice was cool and devoid of pleasantries. "My name is Ben Carter. I am the chief of staff for Serafina Monroe. Ms. Monroe was just assaulted by one of your employees, Chloe Novak, aboard her own aircraft, flight N770SM. George felt the blood drain from his face. He sank into his leather chair. "What? Assaulted? I don't understand. Is she all right?" "She will be fine," Ben continued, ignoring the question. "Ms. Monroe has instructed me to inform you of three things. 1. Your management contract with Monroe Dynamics is hereby suspended, pending a full investigation. All managed aircraft are to be grounded, effective immediately. 2. A team of our forensic accountants will be at your headquarters at 9 a.m. tomorrow to begin a full audit of your books, as is our right under Section 11B of our contract regarding material breaches. 3. Ms. Monroe will be calling you on this line in precisely 26 minutes. I suggest you be there to answer." The line went dead. George stared at the phone, his heart hammering against his ribs. Suspended? Audit? This was a nightmare. This was the end of his company. He immediately tried to call Chloe Novak. The call went straight to voicemail. He called his head of operations. He called HR. Panic set in. Meanwhile, in the sterile interview room in Wyoming, Chloe's story was falling apart. She had tried to paint Serafina as an aggressive, demanding passenger who had become verbally abusive. "She got in my face," Chloe lied, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. "I felt threatened. I have a right to defend myself." Deputy Miller, a man with 20 years of experience reading people, just nodded slowly, making notes. "So you felt threatened by this unarmed woman, who you admit was sitting down until you insulted her, and your response was to strike her across the face?" "She provoked me. She called me prejudiced." "And are you?" the deputy asked blandly. "No, of course not." Deputy Miller sighed and slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a printout of a text message conversation. Chloe's blood ran cold as she saw her own words, her text to Rick. "She looks like she manages a laundromat. I'll be lucky if she doesn't try to pay with a coupon. I hate these pretenders. Your boyfriend, Rick Spencer, provided these to his supervisor when they called him about an unrelated incident this evening," the deputy explained. "Seems he got spooked and decided to cooperate fully to save his own skin. These messages were sent before any alleged provocation, Ms. Novak. They establish a pattern of animosity and prejudice on your part before any interaction took place. This isn't self-defense. This looks a lot like a hate crime." The room began to spin. Rick had betrayed her. He'd thrown her to the wolves to save himself. The door opened and another officer leaned in. "Deputy, Miss Monroe has declined to press criminal charges." A tiny, insane spark of hope ignited in Chloe's chest. "However," the officer continued, "her legal team has just filed a civil suit against Ms. Novak and her employer, Aerolux Elite, for assault, battery, emotional distress, and breach of contract. They're seeking damages. And her corporate parent, Monroe Dynamics, is filing a separate suit against Aerolux for breach of fiduciary duty and fraudulent misrepresentation. They've also flagged you for the FAA's blacklist. You're done in this industry." The spark of hope died, smothered under an avalanche of ruin. No charges meant no jail time. But this was worse. This was financial annihilation, a life sentence to be served in poverty. Back in her hotel suite, a sprawling penthouse overlooking the mountains, Serafina sat with a cup of chamomile tea, an ice pack gently pressed to her cheek. The sting was gone, replaced by a dull ache. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the weary anger in her soul. Her phone rang. It was George Harrison. she answered. Ms. Monroe, Serafina, I am beyond horrified. I am speechless. I had no idea. Serafina cut him off. Did you know your company was 3 weeks from insolvency, George? Silence. Did you know, she continued, her voice like ice, that you were planning to use the advance on our renewed contract to pay off a high-interest loan you took out 6 months ago? Did you know that your reported cash reserves were inflated by nearly 30%? My team found all of this in less than an hour. Were you ever going to tell me, or were you just going to let my company prop up your house of cards until it inevitably collapsed? George Harrison was breathing heavily into the phone. Serafina, I can explain. No, she said simply. You can't. Your dishonesty is as profound as your employees' prejudice. You are both cut from the same cloth. You see what you want to see and you take what you think you can get away with. Effective immediately, our contract is terminated. My team will be in touch regarding the recovery of my assets and the damages owed. You will be hearing from my lawyers, George. Do not call me again. She ended the call and looked out at the mountains, their peaks dark against the star-filled sky. The gears of consequence were now turning, a machine she had set in motion. It was not a machine of vengeance, but of order. It was a machine designed to correct a system that had allowed a man like George and a woman like Chloe to flourish in the first place. The storm had passed, but the cleanup had just begun. The fallout was not a single explosive event, but a slow, grinding collapse. For Chloe Novak, the world did not end with a bang, but with the quiet, incessant hum of a fax machine spitting out legal documents. Aerolux Elite, deprived of its lifeblood, hemorrhaged money. The forensic audit by Monroe Dynamics uncovered years of mismanagement and creative accounting. Within 2 weeks, the company filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, liquidation, not restructuring, liquidation. Over 200 employees, pilots, mechanics, schedulers, and other flight attendants, lost their jobs. Their anger was not directed at Serafina Monroe, the invisible billionaire, but at George Harrison for his deception and at Chloe Novak, whose name was now synonymous with the company's downfall. A leaked internal memo detailing the incident on the G700 went viral within the insular aviation community. Chloe was a pariah. The civil suit was a bludgeon. With the text messages as evidence and the testimony of Captain Davies and his co-pilot, her case was hopeless. Aerolux's insurance refused to cover her, citing gross misconduct. She was personally liable. The judgment was for a staggering sum, covering damages to Serafina's reputation, the cost of disrupting her business, and punitive damages. It was a number so large Chloe couldn't even comprehend it. It was a life sentence of debt. Her attempt to get a job, any job, in the service industry was fruitless. A simple background check revealed the pending lawsuit. No luxury hotel, no high-end restaurant, no airline would touch her. Her FAA flight attendant certification was permanently revoked. The blacklist was real. Rick Spencer, her boyfriend, was the first to abandon the sinking ship. He had been fired from his own job. Serafina's investigators had discovered that his unrelated incident involved him using his position to smuggle small, undeclared luxury goods for a friend, a side hustle to make extra cash. He had sold Chloe out in a panic, and it hadn't even saved him. He texted her one last time. "You ruined my life." He then blocked her number and disappeared. Within 3 months, foreclosure proceedings began on the condo. Chloe was forced to sell her car, her furniture, anything of value, but it was like using a teacup to bail out the Titanic. The shame was a constant companion. The memory of the slap of Serafina's cold, empty eyes played in her dreams. She had flown at the apex of the world, surrounded by luxury she could never possess, and in one moment of blind rage, she had ensured she would never even get close again. 6 months after the flight, Chloe was working 2 jobs. By day, she cleaned rooms at a budget motel off a highway interchange, the air thick with the smell of stale smoke and bleach. By night, she worked the late shift at an all-night diner, serving greasy food to truckers and tired travelers. Her customers were not billionaires. They were tired, ordinary people. Some were kind, some were rude, but all of them saw her as she was, a waitress. No more, no less. The uniform was a cheap polyester dress that was perpetually stained. Her hands, once perfectly manicured to serve champagne, were now raw and chapped from cleaning fluids and hot dishwater. One evening, while wiping down a sticky table, she glanced up at the small television mounted in the corner of the diner. A business news channel was on, and there she was, Seraphina Monroe. She was standing at a podium, not in a power suit, but in a simple, elegant dress. She was announcing the launch of the Monroe Foundation's new initiative, the Altitude Program. It was a massive scholarship and mentorship fund dedicated to helping young women from underprivileged backgrounds pursue careers in STEM, aviation, and engineering. Talent is everywhere, Seraphina said, her voice clear and passionate, the faint scar on her cheek invisible on the screen. Opportunity is not. We cannot afford to let prejudice and assumptions be the gatekeepers of potential. We cannot afford to have a young woman look at a cockpit or a laboratory or a boardroom and think, that place is not for me. We must build a world where the only ceiling is the one you choose for yourself, not one that is imposed upon you. A reporter asked a question. Ms. Monroe, you're known for being intensely private. What prompted you to take such a public stance on this issue? Seraphina smiled, a genuine, warm smile that Chloe had never seen. Let's just say I had a recent experience at 40,000 feet that served as a powerful reminder. It reminded me that sometimes the person serving the water has more potential than the person drinking it. We just have to give them a chance to fly. Chloe stared at the screen, the wet rag frozen in her hand. There was no mention of the slap, no public shaming. Seraphina had taken an ugly, violent act and transformed it into a force for good. She had converted the poison of that day into an antidote for the very sickness that had caused it. That was the final crushing blow. It wasn't about revenge. It had never been about revenge. Seraphina Monroe hadn't destroyed Chloe's life. She had simply stepped out of the way and allowed Chloe to crash into the consequences of her own actions. The immense power Seraphina wielded wasn't just financial. It was the power of composure, of strategy, of turning a personal injury into a public benefit. Chloe finished wiping the table, her reflection a ghostly image in the clean surface. She saw a tired woman in a cheap uniform, her face etched with a bitterness that had cost her everything. She looked away toward the kitchen and picked up her tray. An order was up. The food was getting cold. 5 years is a long time. It's long enough for a scar to fade, for a lawsuit to become a monotonous monthly payment plan, and for the sharp, jagged edges of humiliation to be worn smooth by the relentless grind of daily survival. For Chloe Novak, 5 years had been a masterclass in anonymity. The fire of her rage and the ice of her terror on that flight had long since been extinguished, leaving behind only the cold ash of regret. The diner, the busy bee, was her world now. It was a universe of cracked vinyl booths, the perpetual scent of frying bacon, and the low hum of a neon sign that flickered in the rain. Chloe moved through it like a phantom, her steps practiced, her smile a thin, weary shield. She was 41 now, but felt much older. The haughty, polished flight attendant was a ghost of a different woman. This Chloe had worry lines etched around her eyes and the permanent stoop of someone who is always tired. Her colleagues knew her as a quiet, efficient worker who never complained and never spoke of her past. She was just Chloe, a blank slate. It was a Tuesday night in October, and a cold rain was lashing against the diner's large plate glass windows. Business was slow. A couple of truckers nursed coffees at the counter, and a family finished their meal in a corner booth. Chloe was refilling the salt and pepper shakers when the bell over the door chimed, announcing new arrivals. She didn't look up at first, just continued her task. "Be with you in a minute," she called out mechanically. "Take your time," a calm, familiar voice replied. "It's nasty out there." Chloe's hands froze. The salt shaker slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the counter and spilling a small white pyramid. It couldn't be. It was a voice she had replayed in her nightmares 1,000 times. A voice that had pronounced her professional death sentence over an intercom. Slowly, as if lifting a tremendous weight, she raised her head. Standing just inside the door, shaking out a large black umbrella, was Serafina Monroe. She looked almost exactly the same, perhaps with a few more laugh lines around her eyes. Her hair cut in a chic, short style. She was dressed simply, in dark jeans, boots, and a stylish but practical raincoat. But it was the person with her who made the scene even more surreal. Beside Serafina was a young woman, maybe 20 or 21, with bright, intelligent eyes and a backpack slung over her shoulder. They were laughing together, their conversation easy and warm. Chloe felt the air leave her lungs. Panic, cold and electric, shot through her. Her first instinct was to run, to hide in the kitchen, to feign illness, anything. She ducked behind the counter, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Chloe, table 4 is ready for you." Her manager, a burly man named Sal, barked without looking up from his order slips. Chloe's head swam. She couldn't. She absolutely could not. She looked at Betty, the other waitress on shift, her eyes pleading. Betty just shrugged, gesturing with her coffee pot toward her own full section. There was no escape. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Chloe grabbed a menu and a notepad. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor as she approached the booth where Serafina and the young woman had settled. "Welcome to the Busy Bee," she muttered, her voice a strained whisper. "Can I start you with some coffee?" "That would be wonderful, thank you," Serafina said, her tone pleasant and unassuming. She was focused on the young woman, her back partially to Chloe. "Maria, you have to try the apple pie here. I read online it's the best in the county. After a double cheeseburger," the young woman Maria laughed, "I'm starving." Chloe scribbled down the order, her hands shaking so badly that the words were nearly illegible. Double cheese, apple pie, 2 coffees. She retreated to the safety of the kitchen pass-through, her mind a whirlwind of disbelief and terror. What were they doing here? In this town? In this diner? It felt like a cosmic joke, a punishment tailored specifically for her. She poured the coffees, her movements jerky and clumsy. As she carried the 2 heavy ceramic mugs to the table, she rehearsed a mantra in her head. "Don't look up. Don't make eye contact. You are invisible." But as she placed the second mug on the table in front of Serafina, her trembling hand betrayed her. Coffee sloshed over the rim, puddling in the saucer. "Oh, I am so sorry," Chloe gasped, fumbling for a napkin. "It's no problem at all," Serafina said kindly, looking up to offer a reassuring smile, and their eyes met. For a split second, there was nothing. Serafina's expression was neutral, polite. Then Chloe saw it, a flicker of recognition, a subtle tensing of her jaw. The friendly smile didn't vanish, but it froze, becoming a polite, impenetrable mask. She remembered. Chloe felt a hot flush of shame, so intense it was dizzying. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole. She started to back away, muttering apologies, ready to flee. But then she stopped. For 5 years she had been running. She had run from her past, from her debts, from the woman she used to be. Every morning she woke up with a leaden weight in her stomach, the weight of her unspoken, unatoned for transgression. And now here it was. The moment she had dreaded more than any other. She could run again, or she could finally face the ghost that had haunted every waking moment of her life. Her feet felt rooted to the linoleum floor. She took a breath. "Ms. Monroe," she said, her voice small but clear. The entire diner seemed to fade away. There was only the booth, the rain on the window, and the woman whose life she had violently intersected with so long ago. Serafina's gaze was wary, her posture stiffening. The young woman, Maria, looked between them, her brow furrowed with confusion. "I don't know if you remember my name," Chloe began, her voice cracking. "It's Chloe." "I remember," Serafina said quietly. Her voice was not unkind, but it was flat, devoid of the warmth it held moments before. Tears welled in Chloe's eyes, hot and shameful. "I know this isn't the time or the place, but I might never get another chance. I needed to apologize to you, not for getting fired, not for the lawsuit or the debt. I deserved all of that. I deserved worse." She looked down at her chapped hands, then forced herself to meet Serafina's gaze again. "I am sorry for what I did to you on that plane, for what I said, for striking you. It was a hateful, ugly thing to do, and it came from a hateful, ugly place inside of me. There is no excuse for it. I have lived with it every single day. I needed you to hear me say it. She finished, her throat raw, expecting anger or dismissal or even a cold, satisfied smirk. Serafina was silent for a long moment, studying Chloe's face. She saw the years of hardship etched there, the hollowed-out look of a person who has lost everything, including their pride. She saw the genuine, gut-wrenching remorse in Chloe's swimming eyes. Finally, Serafina gestured to the young woman beside her. Chloe, this is Maria Rojas. Maria is a junior at the University of Wyoming, majoring in aeronautical engineering. She is the top student in her class and the recipient of a full scholarship from the Altitude program. Chloe stared at the bright-faced young woman, her mind struggling to connect the dots. The Altitude program, the initiative she had seen on the news all those years ago. We were visiting her family, Serafina explained, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. They live just outside of town. Maria is going to be one of the lead interns on the design team for our new suborbital vehicle next year. She looked from Maria's proud, curious face back to Chloe's broken one. Consequences are real. They ripple outwards and change lives, for better and for worse. The consequences of your actions that day were ruinous for you. I am not sorry about that. You earned them. Chloe flinched but nodded in agreement. But, Serafina continued, an echo of that day also helped create the program that is giving a brilliant young woman like Maria a chance she might never have had. Life is complex. What we do with the consequences, the choices we make after we've fallen, that is what defines our character. She paused, then delivered her verdict. Thank you for your apology, Chloe. I accept it. A sob escaped Chloe's lips, a sound of profound, painful relief. It was as if a 50-pound weight had been lifted from her soul. She nodded, unable to speak, and fled to the kitchen. Sal shot her a questioning look, but for once, she ignored him. She leaned against a stainless steel counter, letting the tears fall until she had no more left to cry. When she composed herself and returned to the dining room, the booth was empty. The bill was settled on the table, and next to it was a $10 bill for their $8 check. A simple, standard tip. No more, no less. It was not a handout. It was not pity. It was a transaction, completed and closed. Chloe picked up the money, her hand perfectly steady. She spent the rest of her shift in a daze, but it was a peaceful daze. The world was the same. The diner was the same. Her life of struggle was the same. But she was different. The rage was gone. The shame was gone. The hate, which she now realized had been directed as much at herself as anyone else, was finally gone. She had been seen, she had been heard, and she had been, in a way, absolved. Not by a billionaire, but by herself. The debt remained, but the haunting was over. That single shocking moment on a private jet wasn't just about a slap. It was about the collision of two worlds, one built on prejudice and resentment, the other on quiet, unshakable power. Chloe's story is a stark reminder that the assumptions we make can have devastating consequences, and that true power isn't in showing off your wealth, but in how you respond when you are disrespected. Serafina Monroe didn't just own the plane, she owned herself. She used an act of hate to fuel an act of immense generosity, proving that the ultimate response to ugliness is to create something beautiful. What did you think of Chloe's downfall? Was it a fair outcome, or was it too harsh? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of choices and their powerful consequences. Thank you for watching.